Hi everyone. The composer that I picked to talk about today is Richard Strauss, and his first name looks like it'd be pronounced Richard, but in German it would be pronounced Richard, and he is a German composer. He lived from 1864 to 1949, so a long life. And given that he spent his whole life in Germany, a very eventful period in Germany's history. When he was born, Germany wasn't even a unified country yet, so he in his youth lived through Germany becoming unified, and then in kind of middle age he saw Germany defeated in World War I, and then at the end of his life he saw Germany defeated in World War II. So a very momentous time in Germany's history, to say the least. And he is a little bit controversial, or not always viewed in the most positive light, just because of some things in his personal life. The main thing being that he worked with the Nazis in the 1930s. He never joined the Nazi Party, and he actually hated the Nazis because he thought they were very uncultured and just sort of animals. But he did in the 1930s work as the head of their like music ministry in their government, and so he's often criticized for that he sort of collaborated with them. But there were a couple of reasons for that. One was he had a daughter-in-law who was Jewish, and he was trying to protect her and her family, and he was able to save some of them. But also he loved culture so much, German culture especially, culture and art, but culture and art from other countries as well. And given his low opinion of the sort of cultural tastes of the leaders of the Nazi Party, he was trying to protect the culture and the art of Germany from kind of being destroyed. So there were reasons why he worked with them, and I won't kind of, preach about any of it or anything like that, but it is an interesting question that comes up sometimes when you have an artist who has done things that are maybe not ideal in terms of his personal life, if that affects how we view their art, or whether their art should still be consumed and appreciated or not. So just an interesting kind of philosophical question, but you do hear that occasionally about Strauss, that he worked with the Nazis, and that's kind of a summary of kind of how that came to be, and some of the reasons why perhaps he did it. But that being said, I do think his music is really beautiful. He's actually one of my favorite composers, so I'm kind of showing my bias here, but he's important historically because he's kind of the final like flowering of romantic music in Germany. So the romantic period really begins with Beethoven in the early 1800s, and he was German, and he was followed by Johannes Brahms. We study both Beethoven and Brahms in cycle 2. So Brahms, another really important German romantic composer, and Brahms was followed by a composer we haven't talked about, but named Richard Wagner, who's hugely important in the Romantic period, and then Strauss comes after that. So he's kind of the last in this long line, about a century long, of hugely important German Romantic composers. So he's historically important for that reason. And he's best known for two genres. One is opera. He wrote about 10 operas, and probably his first two operas, written I think 1905 and 1910 roughly, are probably his two most historically important operas. The first one is called Salome, and the second one's called Electra. But they're just a little, they're not really appropriate for younger viewers. Maybe once you're like an older teenager, they're amazing, but just a little intense for younger audiences. So I picked a short excerpt from I believe it's his third opera that I think was written in 1911. The opera is called Der Rosenkavalier, so it's in German. And the title translates to like the Cavalier of the Rose, or the Rose Bearer. There's this silver or gold rose that is carried by this character, and that's where the name comes from. And I won't really get into the plot of it. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a continuation in plot of like the Mozart opera, The Marriage of Figaro. So it's it's much more traditional in both the musical style and the plot than what Salome and Electra were. Those were very avant-garde, very modern, and he got a little more traditional with the Rosenkavalier. But the excerpt I picked is from the very end of the opera, and it's this trio with these three soprano singers, which soprano is the highest voice type for women, the highest range. And the video that I picked, they're not in costume. They're not. It's not a staged version of the opera. It's just in a concert that they're performing it. But they're basically singing about love and sort of the sacrifices that we make sometimes for love. And I just think it's some of the most beautiful music ever written. To me, it's so beautiful. It's like it makes your soul hurt because it's so gorgeous. Hopefully you like it. I think it was actually played at Strauss's funeral, so music that he was really proud of. I just think it's wonderful. So that's an example of his opera. I don't know if I mentioned he wrote about 10 operas. So that's one of his genres that he's most known for. The other genre is what is called tone poem. So the example that I picked for that, he wrote about 10 tone poems as well. The example I picked for that is called Also Sprach Zarathustra. So that's quite a mouthful, but it translates to Thus Spake Zarathustra. So Zarathustra is a name. And let me tell you a little bit about tone poems as I kind of tell you a little bit about this specific tone poem. So generally speaking, tone poems are a genre from the Romantic period, and there were other composers who wrote tone poems, but Strauss is one of the best known of the composers of tone poems. They're widely performed. His tone poems are widely performed today. Let's see. They are, in contrast, they're for orchestra. And in contrast to something like a symphony, they do not have separate movements typically. They are continuous music with no pauses. So in the case of Also Sprach Zarathustra, it's a half hour long of just straight music. So they can get quite long with really no pauses typically. They are typically based on their program music. So I think we talked about that with Rimsky-Korsakov. And that's a big thing from the Romantic period where the music is trying to evoke typically something from art, maybe a painting, or especially something from literature, a work of literature. So in the case of Also Sprach Zarathustra, sometimes people just call it Also Sprach. So in the case of Also Sprach, that piece of literature is a philosophical novel called Also Sprach Zarathustra by the writer Friedrich Nietzsche, who is a really, really important Romantic philosopher and writer from Germany. I won't get into the story and what kind of the program specifically of this piece and what that book is about because it's very complicated philosophy. But it's very exciting music. And like I said, it's a long piece of music. It's about a half hour long. But the reason that I picked it, if you don't make it through all of it, that's totally okay because it's pretty heavy stuff. There's a lot of stuff packed into that half hour. But the opening of it is super famous, and I guarantee you will hear it throughout your life in commercials, in cartoons, sometimes like parodies. It's used all the time, and as soon as you hear it, I think you will recognize it. And that opening, it's just the first minute or so, but it is meant to depict sunrise, and it is very heroic, very epic, larger than life. Strauss is, brass players like me love Strauss because his music has tons of awesome brass parts that are just loud, in your face, intense, exciting sort of music, and so that's what the opening of this piece is. But if you listen to the first 5 or 6 minutes, you'll hear then there's a lot of changes of mood. So right after that heroic opening in the first minute or so, you get this much more subdued writing for the strings, and it's beautiful. So Strauss was not only capable of this huge, heroic, exciting music, but also much more contemplative, and you kind of get that in the Rosenkavalier excerpt as well, but much more contemplative, sort of quiet emotions, but still very intensely felt emotion. Um, so let's see, I think also Sprach was written in 1895, somewhere around there. So it's very romantic in style, a huge orchestra. This orchestra is enormous. He wrote lots of extra woodwind and brass parts beyond the size of a normal orchestra. So just if you look at the stage, the orchestra fills the stage because it's just an enormous size orchestra that Strauss writes for. He even includes organ. There's an organ in there too. So that's typical of later romantic music, is humongous orchestras. So just lots of sound the orchestra is capable of producing. I can't think of anything else I wanted to say. Strauss, I hope you like his music. It's like I said, I kind of have a bias that I love his music. I think he expresses something that I think there's very few composers, at least for me. It speaks to me and affects me emotionally in a way that very few other composers do. So that's very typical of romantic music, though, is an attempt to really kind of hit at your feelings and be very emotionally deep. And I think Strauss is kind of among the best at that. So I hope you like his music. At the very least, if you listen to the beginning of Also Sprach Zarathustra, you will know where that music comes from when you hear it come up during lots of movies and things that you'll watch. You'll know where it's from. But that is Richard Strauss, one of the late Romantic German composers.